Good evening, tributes, and welcome back to Panem Reborn. I'd like to thank all the usual people in this video, including Christian Blanco, whose series Tales of the Hunger Games this series is based off of. His channel is linked below. I'd also like to thank Andrew McLean, who provided some of the artwork in this series. His blog is linked below as well. I'd like to thank my editors, Octavian Sthesia and Ray B, for assisting with this series. Much appreciated. And I'd like to thank all of you who continue to watch the series. I'm so grateful for the support, and thank you very much. Just letting you guys know, there is going to be a content warning for self-harm at the timestamp 59 minutes and 12 seconds, so if you need to skip this, please skip to 1 hour 49 seconds. I will also remind you of this ahead of time in the video. Thanks for understanding, and let's dive into Panem. After the Great War, France had struggled to rebuild its infrastructure, and much of the more urban areas in the new district were still under reconstruction. Despite supervision from the capital and increased resource flow from President Mace, District 15 still needed a centralized location to conduct its rebanks. It was therefore decided at the start of the 101st Games that all those eligible from Sectors B, C, and D would be taken by bullet train to Sector A for the rebanks. One of the few large open spaces in Sector A was the former Champ de Mars, now referred to as the Champ de Mace in honor of President Mace, and this was selected as the permanent location for all future reapings in District 15. Capital commentators covering the District 15 reapings noted the eerily quiet crowd of youths in pressed lavender suits and dresses shuffling forward, eyes to the ground, as they were nudged by impatient peacekeepers. The atmosphere was tense, even from the commentator booths, and Rosalia Sanchez was seen holding her breath while watching the deserted Champ de Mace fill with people. President Mace stood surrounded by a battalion of peacekeepers on a stage set up in front of the reconstructed Eiffel Tower, which we now know was renamed Mace Tower at the time. Consult File 11, Rebuilding After Wartime, Mace's Infrastructure Vision for reference on Mace's tradition of naming structures and places after himself. Once the flow of people into the reaping area had slowed, President Mace allowed Mayor Lemieux to make a brief speech. Clearly being encouraged by the group of peacekeepers with very large weapons behind him, Mayor Lemieux mumbled his way through his speech about the glory of Panem in flawed English. Without the usual forced applause from crowds in the continental districts, an uncomfortable silence hung in the air as he stepped down from the podium. President Mace then took the stage, making a great show of expressing his condolences for the loss of France's infrastructure in the senseless war, and promising to help rebuild it with as many resources as the capital could provide. He continued to speak at length for several minutes about fighting for the honor of Panem and the necessity of the games, lecturing the silently gathered citizens. Eventually, he welcomed in Lena Siragon, victor of the 102nd Hunger Games, to perform the reapings for this year. Lena appeared slightly green to match the shade of her chartreuse dress as she approached the reaping bowls, and it was widely reported that she had suffered a degree of motion sickness from flying in a hovercraft to France that morning. Nevertheless, she presented a brave face and moved over to the female reaping bowl to choose the name of the female tribute for this year from District 15. Gingerly placing her hand in the bowl, she drew a slip of paper and glided to the microphone to read it. With slightly trembling hands, she unfolded the slip and spoke clearly into the microphone, reading out the name of a Valentine Beausoleil. The camera swept the 4 sector-divided areas of the Champ de Mace for several seconds before focusing in on a 13-year-old girl with brilliant red hair in the Sector B enclosure. She had burst into tears at the mention of her name and was clinging desperately to another girl in a lavender hijab. Peacekeepers at the sides of the Sector B enclosure quickly closed in on her before seizing her by the elbows and dragging her forward to the center stage. She mounted the stairs, eyes rimmed with red, and refused to look as Lena attempted to awkwardly offer her a comforting pat on the shoulder. Lena's arm flailed around for a moment as Valentine turned aside to reject her, and she attempted to cover the blunder by turning away to move to the male reaping bowl. Her low heels clicked on the stage as she stepped over to draw a name. Lena then read out the name of one Janvier Picard. Immediately, the energy in the crowd shifted from hostile to frantic. Many girls gasped aloud and began crying, sobbing "Pas Janvier, pas Janvier," which capital translators clarified to continental viewers to mean not Janvier. The capital focused in on a ferocious young man of 18 with dark curly hair and bright green eyes, who was staring ahead in determination and calm defiance as he was brought to the stage. Rosalia explained to Capital audiences that Janvier was a popular actor in District 15 who had been recruited to be in several Capital films explaining the new bilingual protocols at District 15 schools since the annexing, and had rapidly become a cult favorite among many youths in the district. Hundreds of hands reached out past the ropes in the enclosures to try and touch him as he was escorted past, forcing peacekeepers to deploy batons to beat back the crowd. Several people had begun weeping loudly, and many others began to shout what was assumed to be profanity at those on stage, pour voler Janvier. The commotion did not stop even when peacekeepers set off some smoke bombs to daze the angry protesters, and Janvier took the stage slightly on edge amid the mounting chaos. Many members of the assembled crowd appeared to be agitated about far more than just the reaping of Janvier Picard, shouting abuse at peacekeepers, President Mace, and even a petrified Lena Siragan. It was only when peacekeepers started to mass pepper spray the most rowdy areas of the crowd that those shouting obscenities ended up coughing and spluttering too much to continue protesting. Janvier and Valentine were presented as the tributes for District 15 this year, Janvier gently taking Valentine's hand and holding their hands up together as peacekeepers continued to employ aggressive crowd control and the onstage security escorted President Mace and Lena out of the area. As part of the conditions of surrender when France had fallen to Panem, Janvier and Valentine were not permitted to see their families before being escorted to the hovercraft on the way to the games, to prevent them from passing contraband items like the French had done between its soldiers during the Great War. Peacekeepers muscled the pair into a waiting hovercraft, where they stared in awe at the ultramodern capital technology all around them. Valentine appeared rather intimidated by the presence of several AVOXs, who were cleaning various areas around the compartment in silence. However, she seemed even more awestruck by the presence of Janvier than the hovercraft and its technology. He smiled sadly down at the younger girl, but she shied away from him and stared at the ground instead of making eye contact. Janvier politely averted his eyes as well, as the pair were introduced to their mentor. In order to ensure smooth communication between the mentor for District 15 and their tributes, President Mace had chosen Charmian Quince as the mentor for the district. She was a tall and imposing woman, a former Panamian soldier fluent in both English and French. As she greeted her tributes politely on the hovercraft, kissing them each on the cheek as was customary in District 15, she invited them in French to sit with her on one of several plush sofas. Capital translators had to interpret the quick exchanges in French that occurred afterward, although Rosalia commended Charmian for having learned French very quickly while stationed in France during the Great War. According to the translations shown on screen, Charmian was inquiring about Janvier and Valentine's strengths and weaknesses. Valentine shyly admitted that she was just a milkmaid in training, and while she had built up a fair amount of strength from this, she did not know how to do much else other than milk cows and churn butter. Charmian reassured Valentine that together they could find something she could do, and told her not to worry in a brusque tone. Charmian then turned to Janvier and surveyed him with a critical eye. Rosalia laughed aloud as she read the ensuing translations on Capital TV, which detailed Charmian asking him if he had any other talents besides the equivalent of looking like a carved statue in French, to which Janvier was taken aback and flushed bright red. He replied indignantly that he was a fine actor, having been cast in multiple Capital productions to orientate District 15 to Panem, and Charmian appeared pleased by this answer. It was at this time that a series of AVOXs entered the room and presented the trio with an array of shining platters of freshly roasted and spiced meats, crisp vegetables, lush fruits, and decadent desserts. Valentine, in particular, appeared entranced by a thimble-sized cherry cordial placed directly in front of her, but was quickly shot down by Charmian, who scolded her and told her to eat actual food first. Janvier obediently served himself small proportions each of meat, vegetables, and fruit before sneaking a meringue when Charmian was busy lecturing Valentine about eating a balanced meal. He grinned mischievously at a nearby female AVOX, who had noticed his sneaky endeavor, causing her to blush and drop a plate of cream puffs all over the floor. Immediately, Janvier stood up to help, but Charmian yanked him by the sleeve back to the table and reminded him that the AVOXs could handle themselves. The hovercraft ride passed fairly quickly despite the distance between District 15 and Panem due to the capital's advanced flight technology. Valentine napped on a sofa for most of the trip, only waking up to eat a small meal, while Janvier pensively stared out the window at the passing clouds and occasionally nodded along to Charmian's running dialogue of advice for the games. It was early evening by the time the hovercraft touched down, and the pair appeared rather jet-lagged to Capital citizens as they exited the hovercraft and took a brief train ride to Mace Station. For the past 2 years, the tributes from District 15 had been treated with a mix of suspicion and mild curiosity by Capitalites at the train station, and this year was no exception. Despite the capitalite's suspicions, Janvier soon attracted a growing knot of teenagers to his location with his striking looks. He politely posed for photos and signed autographs, although when a young woman thrust her baby at him and asked him to sign its forehead, Charmian was quick to intervene. Valentine also attracted a small crowd of younger girls, who were awed by her long and flowing hair. She patiently allowed them to stroke it, but was at a loss when one girl asked for her hair care routine. Valentine fumbled for an answer before admitting that she did not really have one, and that she just put water and plain soap in her hair every few days. The capital girls appeared aghast, but listened attentively as she described briefly what it was like being a milkmaid in District 15, and shyly signed some autographs. Charmian allowed Valentine a few minutes to chat, but soon escorted her and Janvier to their accommodations. Earlier, in District 5, a very exhausted and even more nauseated Lena Siragan arrived to perform the reapings for the district. She had been shuttled around from place to place all day, and still had several districts to go before being relieved of her duties. Aside from this, she was also quite anxious after the commotion and harassment that had erupted in District 15. It was because of this that Lena sped through the reapings, hastily drawing the name of a Sierra D'Angelo from the female reaping bowl after Mayor Whitlock made a brief speech. A tall, reedy girl of 16 with limp black hair and dull eyes stepped forward from the assembled crowd, sighing and glaring at those who had exhaled in relief around her upon hearing that they were not chosen. Rosalia remarked that she looked like she had been through the ringer a few times, as Sierra trudged up to the stage and grudgingly shook Lena's hand, kicking up several pebbles along the way. Lena turned to the male reaping bowl and gingerly covered her mouth with a gloved hand to suppress her continuing nausea. Using her free hand, she carefully reached in and plucked the name of 14-year-old Austin Clark. The camera zoomed in on a small, mousy boy with fair brown hair and a light smattering of freckles on his face. He immediately grew quite pale upon hearing his name, to the point that Rosalia described him as looking like a ghost. Reviewing our files, we were able to piece together that this tribute was in fact a distant cousin to the late Victorine Vattenfall, whom one may recall as the runner-up in the Tales of the Hunger Games files, File 91. Rosalia remarked upon this family resemblance in her commentary. Austin skittered up to the stage, nearly jumping backwards in alarm as Lena attempted to politely shake his hand with her free hand. Sierra sighed loudly as the pair were presented as this year's tributes from District 5, while Austin stared around with a cautious gaze. A pair of peacekeepers hoisted the tributes under the elbows and dragged them away to the Justice Building, where they were to be greeted by their families. Sierra unenthusiastically embraced her parents, who muttered something encouraging to her that was too low to be picked up by the camera's audio. Austin sat sullenly in the drawing room, as he had no living relations to see him off. Rosalia commented that he must have been one of the many war orphans left behind by the savagery of the Civil War, causing many viewers in Mace Square to dab at their eyes and make clucking noises of sympathy. After 5 minutes' time, a peacekeeper re-entered the rooms and escorted both tributes out to the train platform. The pair were then taken to board the train to the capital, where they would be settled into their apartment, as was customary. Almost instantly after entering the train, Austin was bowled over by a tall and flamboyant young man with a bright yellow afro. Dusting himself off and popping back up a second later, the man revealed himself to be Hortensio Robin, the assigned mentor for District 5. Sierra reluctantly tried to help Austin off the floor, although he struggled to his feet on his own and tried to flick lint off his gray sweater. Hortensio loudly apologized for the intrusion and beckoned the pair to sit with him on a sofa in the corner, ordering 3 glasses of whiskey. Sierra quickly tried to head off this request, stating she did not drink and she doubted Austin did either, but it was promptly ignored and the pair waited awkwardly for the tray of drinks to arrive. During this time, Hortensio flicked on the television in front of them and began to rather obnoxiously lecture the duo on the past 2 games from the 3rd incarnation. He put in a tape of the 101st games and began to point out where certain tributes could have avoided death, gesturing wildly at the boy from 11 passing out in a snowdrift and reminding them to never attend a feast when they were already running on low fuel. Sierra raised her hand and asked why this was relevant, as they would likely not be in a snowy arena due to there being one just 2 years ago, but Hortensia snapped at her and told her to go to the time-out corner, jabbing a finger at the porta-potty at the rear of the compartment. Sierra stormed off while making an obscene gesture, leaving Hortensio behind with a perplexed Austin. Hortensio continued lecturing Austin about what tributes in the 101st and 102nd games could have done to avoid their deaths, although Austin seemed more confused and intimidated than understanding of Hortensio's advice. Over time, as Sierra brooded in the corner near the restroom, Hortensio began to quiz Austin on how to avoid the same mistakes made by tributes in the past 2 games, to which Austin revealed a surprising degree of retention skills and impressed his mentor. Sierra feigned annoyance in the corner, but many viewers could see she was actually listening intently while pretending to be sleeping. As the train drew into the capital and slowed to a stop at Mace Station in the early evening, the pair from 5 were greeted by the usual crowd of curious onlookers. Austin immediately shied away from the crowd and stayed stuck to Sierra's side the entire time, in spite of Hortensio's best efforts to dislodge him. Sierra scowled at the crowd and spat at a Capitalite who attempted to wave his hand in front of her face to get her attention. Surprisingly, few were deterred by her attitude, and Rosalia admitted that sometimes the Capital liked the feisty ones. Hortensio soon dragged the pair off to go to their apartment, clearly sensing that they were not making the positive impression he had wanted. While the pair from 15 were awaiting their stylist, Charmian turned on the television to have them view the other reapings, reminding them in rapid French to pay attention to the other tributes' behavior at the reapings. When the footage from District 5 showed up on the screen, Janvier snorted with laughter at seeing Austin almost fall over in shock. He turned to Valentine and muttered, "Quelle goose," causing her to break out into laughter as well. Charmian scowled at the pair and rapped Janvier sharply on the head. This settled him down considerably, and Charmian pointedly remarked in French that they needed to pay attention in case they ended up dying to one of these seemingly non-threatening tributes in the arena. She then reminded them that Continental Panem had great amounts of experience with the games, yet this was only District 15's 3rd year participating. Janvier began to argue that it was only that way because Panem decided to invade France, but Charmian swiftly silenced him with a stern glance. Valentine looked back and forth between the pair in fright. The tension soon subsided due to the arrival of the pair's stylist, Iris Vaux, who appeared a bit distressed and frazzled as she stumbled into the apartment. Iris was one of the few French who had been permitted to move into the capital for the purposes of cultural integration after the annexing, and also due to the fact that few capital stylists wished to learn French to communicate with the tributes of District 15 or work with them. She apologized in French to the group as she began flipping through a notebook of designs and displayed them to Charmian. Because Janvier and Valentine were from different sectors of District 15, it was a challenge to coordinate their outfits without looking mismatched, but Iris managed to subtly work their different sectors into simple white outfits. Valentine's hair was styled up into a milkmaid braid, while she was dressed in a simple white dress patterned with tiny lavender flowers to reflect the outfits worn historically by milkmaids in France. Janvier was dressed in a white tailored suit with suspenders and a bow tie, the latter of which was patterned in lavender theater masks. Charmian declared the pair one of the best dressed she had seen yet as a mentor, although Valentine pointed out that there had only been 2 other pairs from the district so far, and this was not much to go by, to which Charmian awkwardly coughed and moved on from the topic. The tributes from 15 were ushered out of the apartment and down to the tribute parade, where they were observed to be discussing in hushed tones their first impressions of the other tributes, though they did not interact with any other districts. They caused a slight stir when Valentine attempted to pat one of their horses and it snorted in her face, causing her to shriek, but otherwise kept a low profile until the start of the parade. Meanwhile, over at the District 5 apartment, Austin and Sierra were being whisked around by Hortensio and their stylist, Perdita Gamp. Perdita was the sister of the District 3 stylist, Florizel Gamp, and was equally as petite in stature. Sierra tripped on her multiple times while the stylist bustled about, causing her to indignantly squeak in response. Soon, Perdita and Hortensio revealed the pair's parade costumes. To the pair's surprise and slight revulsion, their costumes were shown to be wind turbine-inspired ensembles. The central part included a shapeless white tunic that stretched all the way from the shoulders to the ankles. They were given large 3-pronged headdresses to fit over their heads, leaving only their faces uncovered. Sierra glowered at the outlandish costume, while Austin awkwardly waddled around in the apartment, as his costume needed to be hemmed due to his short height. At last, the tributes' outfits were adjusted and they were permitted to leave to wait for the parade. Once in the waiting area, they refused to make eye contact with any other tributes. Austin and Sierra were distinctly aware of several others pointing and laughing at them, notably Shina from 1, Varus from 2, and Tauros from 10. To avoid having to handle these tributes, Austin busied himself with brushing their horses' manes, while Sierra leaned against the chariot and crossed her arms in a hostile manner, as if daring others to approach. The parade soon kicked off without much fanfare as the chariots rolled smoothly into the circuit. Janvier and Valentine were well received by the capital crowds, as Janvier was almost instantly buried under a pile of roses thrown by capital admirers. Rosalia commented on their poise and grace while praising their minimalistic outfits, stating that Iris Vaux had found a clever way to tie together their respective sectors' trades. The tributes from Five were not so lucky, and were widely criticized for both their lackluster energy during the parade and the perception that their parade outfits appeared ready to blow the audience away, but in a bad way. President Mace made his yearly speech as soon as the final chariot rolled to a stop. Rosalia had been too busy commentating this year to name the honorary best-dressed tributes until this time, though she awarded the title to the tributes from District 1, who had been draped in swaths of flowing golden fabric covered in a shimmering layer of glitter. During President Mace's speech, Janvier could be seen plucking rose petals off his starched shirt as Valentine attempted to help him out. Austin fidgeted with his costume, accidentally elbowing Sierra in the process. Sierra did not take kindly to the nudging and angrily elbowed him back, causing a minor stir as Austin flailed for a moment to regain his balance and avoid falling out of the chariot. Fortunately, this incident did not disrupt President Mace's speech, and the parade was concluded without further interruptions. Rosalia remarked that it had certainly been an interesting year as far as costumes went, pointing out the banana-inspired costumes from District 11 and the faux tree bark armor seen on the pair from 7. As she signed off for the evening, she expressed hope for the potential reinstatement of Anderson fashion now that the capital was starting to return to its former power, leaving capital viewers satisfied with the day's events and eager to return the following day for more coverage. Back at the apartments, Charmian congratulated Janvier and Valentine on a successful parade, stating that they had made a much better impression than all of her past mentees. She encouraged them to get some rest and told them to begin thinking about what they would want to work on at the training center the following morning. Hortensio scolded Austin and Sierra for their low energy at the parade, but even he admitted that the unappealing costumes had not done them many favors, running a hand through his bright yellow hair in agitation and sending them off to bed in a huff. Austin and Sierra were awakened the next morning by Hortensio loudly honking an air horn in each of their respective bedrooms before jolting out of bed and reluctantly following his strict dietary and grooming instructions to prepare for the 3 days of training. In the District 15 apartment, Janvier and Valentine were barely awake, having slept poorly due to the jet lag from their hovercraft ride the previous day. Charmian finally managed to get their attention by waving around several pastries in front of their faces and gave them a few final pointers before instructing them to head down to the training center. Gloria Steele once again greeted this year's tributes with a serene and cool smile that did not reach her eyes, and reminded them of the usual training rules. During this time, Rosalia noted that Austin and Yorick, from 3, were communicating silently from across the ring of tributes, seemingly agreeing to work together at the stations. Valentine appeared glued to Janvier's side, while Sierra simply scowled at the other tributes. Once the rules had been explained, the tributes dispersed to the various stations provided at the training center. Connor, from 4, was seen at the Trident station, giving lessons to Camphor from 7 in exchange for the promise of axe-wielding lessons. Their district partners, Ryan and Sadira, also appeared to be working together, dominating the Axe's station. Reportedly, Shina, from 1, claimed the Spear station for herself, and refused to allow any other tributes there, making a show of menacingly sharpening her spear whenever anyone approached. Janvier and Valentine spent their 3 days moving from station to station, particularly the edible plants and weapons stations. By far, their favorite appeared to be the archery station, which Janvier in particular enjoyed. Despite his lack of experience, he quickly picked up the skill, and within a few hours even the station's trainer was impressed by his accuracy. Valentine had some more trouble due to her smaller stature and clumsiness, but even she managed to hit a few bullseyes at the station over time. Valentine appeared to excel at the weightlifting station, cheerfully bragging to an astonished Janvier that she had been hauling heavy milk pails in Sector B for a very long time. Even the career tributes were regarding her warily from afar, and Janvier hastily muttered to her in French to set the weights down, as he did not like the nature of the looks they were giving. Austin worked with Yorick from 3, a bespectacled boy with a lisp, which had made him the target of verbal taunts from the ones and twos. However, these two boys appeared to get along quite well and practiced at various survival stations and the knives station throughout the 3 days of training. Austin showed Yorick how to make a slingshot, as he had picked up the skill rather quickly, while Yorick offered assistance in fire starting, and they both kept a close eye on Sierra to see what skills she could offer as a potential ally. Sierra spent most of the 3 days of training at the camouflage station, learning to paint herself into multiple types of backgrounds and occasionally joining Austin and Yorick at a few different stations. However, she was banned from the station during the 3rd day, when she started to use her newfound talents to jump out at tributes while camouflaged. Bucky, from 9, had fainted in shock after being jumped at, resulting in her removal from the station. However, after she tried her luck at the Trident station for several minutes on the 3rd day, she seemingly became overwhelmed and had to sit down, before being escorted by her concerned district partner to the medical corner to lie down for a while. At the conclusion of training, all tributes were summoned in turn to demonstrate their skills for the game makers. By now, tributes performances had become an open secret within the capital, so it was no surprise that many of the smaller and more underground tabloids reported on leaked information about the tributes demonstrations for the game makers. Austin had reportedly made a small slingshot and accurately hit the center of several targets with it, somewhat impressing the game makers, but not much. Sierra had painted herself into the weapons rack, although one game maker pointed out from the observation booth that she had missed a spot on her elbow, and there was a very blatant flesh-colored section of the rack. Janvier had calmly fired several arrows into the centers of various targets, while Valentine had thrown around some heavy weights and impressed several game makers. The scores were posted soon after the demonstrations were finished, and many Capital commentators, including Rosalia, were surprised at the large number of high scorers from outer districts this year. Topping the ranks with scores of 10 were Varys from 2 and Connor from 4, followed closely by Sardonyx from 1, Orina from 2, and Janvier from 15 with scores of 9. At the bottom of the pack were Bucky from 9 and Raya with 10, with scores of 3. Valentine had scored a respectable 7 for her display, while Sierra had earned a middling 6. Austin had only managed a meager 4, putting him near the lower end of the group. When the scores came out, Hortensio air-horned his tributes, angry with them for not being more skilled. Charmian was much more pleased with her tributes and praised them for their scores, saying it was best to be in the middle rather than too high or low to keep the target off their backs. Both mentors, however, were much more focused on impressing the capital with their tributes interviews, and the training scores were soon forgotten in anticipation of the interviews the following morning. Rosalia Sanchez showed up for the interviews this year in an unusual dress, tiered with cascading layers of what appeared to be smooth pebbles. The bottom of the dress was a deep blue and swished around her ankles, giving the illusion of flowing water. Sierra was rather early on in the lineup, emerging in a shapeless and gridded blue dress, apparently giving the impression of solar panels. Rosalia winced at this unique take on District 5's industry, but declined to comment and proceeded with the interview anyway. She inquired about Sierra's abilities and how they might help her in the arena, to which Sierra responded that she could camouflage like no other, and had already used this against other tributes during training. Sierra remained sullen throughout the interview, and even once interrupted Rosalia by belching loudly, causing gasps to ripple through the audience. There was complete silence as Sierra cheekily grinned, and Rosalia sat in open-mouthed shock across from her, having been mid-sentence. The interview was swiftly concluded after this, and Sierra did not even receive any applause when leaving the stage. Hortensio could be seen backstage looking ready to throttle his female mentee, while Austin readied himself to take the stage. Rosalia regained her composure in time to greet Austin, who appeared intimidated by the bright lights and crowd, although she managed to put him at ease by warmly inviting him to sit across from her. He had been dressed in a suit to match Sierra's dress, but the suit was slightly too large for him, and he repeatedly had to roll back the cuffs during the interview. Rosalia asked Austin about a variety of topics, from his skills to his experiences so far in the capital. He answered them all with surprising frankness and maturity, earning respectful applause throughout. Rosalia concluded the interview by asking if he had any family at home for whom he wanted to win. Austin instantly froze up and struggled to get words out, his body instinctively curling into a defensive position. He replied that he did not have a family anymore, but was unable to offer further comment, and Rosalia gently replied that he did not have to say anything else before he turned and fled the stage. Hortensio appeared upset that his tribute had run off stage, but was still somewhat more pleased with Austin than with Sierra's attitude earlier. At the far end of the lineup were Janvier and Valentine, with Valentine being called up first near the end of the night. Her red hair had been double braided, giving viewers the impression that she was younger than her actual age, and she had been dressed in a creamy white dress that was intended to represent Milk from Sector B. During her interview, Valentine was bashful and quiet, although when she did speak, she managed to charm the capital with her endearing French accent. Rosalia asked how her English was so good despite her youth, and Valentine explained that the capital had rebuilt many schools in France after the war. Schools in District 15 now taught English as a required subject, administered by capital teachers themselves. Rosalia smiled and replied that the greatness of the capital was truly remarkable, before thanking Valentine for her time and awaiting her final interviewee on stage. Janvier rose up from backstage on a lifting platform, and almost immediately after his entrance, several middle-aged capital women fainted in the crowd. He scratched his head in embarrassment as he observed this phenomenon, and even Rosalia had to steady herself to avoid swooning a bit as she stood up to greet him. Janvier politely greeted her by kissing her on both cheeks and offered her a seat, flustering Rosalia more. For once, Rosalia struggled to remain composed throughout this interview. Multiple times, she asked a question and only nodded dreamily as Janvier responded, shaking her head rapidly to continue listening. Rosalia was unfortunately forced to conclude the interview early due to her lack of attention, and one particularly saucy capital citizen called out to Janvier as he left the stage, "Boxers or briefs?" To which Janvier replied, "Whichever you prefer to imagine on me," and cheekily waved. He received a standing ovation from those who had not yet fainted and was loudly cheered as he left the stage. It took several glasses of ice water for Rosalia to recover and be prepared to welcome head game maker Marin to the interview stage. Head game maker Marin appeared in a crisp beige pantsuit with a crystallized flower in their boutonniere. This year, they were more tight-lipped than ever, refusing to divulge any hints about the arena, but promising that there were some very exciting events planned out by the game maker team. Rosalia appeared interested, but could not coax any more information out of head game maker Marin, and the interview was soon concluded to curious murmuring among capital audiences. The next morning, all tributes were awakened early to get ready and enter the arena. Hortensio sharply reprimanded his tributes for yawning as he frog-marched them to the launch rooms, where they found this year's arena uniforms. To their surprise, the outfits were rather unlike anything most tributes had worn or seen before. Each tribute was given a pair of cargo pants and a stretchy tee, as well as some sturdy boots. Austin and Sierra each put on these outfits with suspicious glances, attempting to figure out what kind of environment would require them. Hortensio saw each of them off with what was clearly much more relief than sadness, while the pair from 15 were in their own launch rooms preparing to step into the tubes. Charmian offered a few quick words of encouragement in French, which seemed to ease their worries. Valentine made a brief and unidentifiable crossing gesture over her chest, which confused several capital commentators, although they quickly moved on to focus on the launch countdown commencing. The launch tubes then slowly and deliberately rose up. As the tubes emerged from the catacombs, many tributes seemed shocked to realize they had been rising from underwater and were centering around a tall, stony structure. This structure contained the cornucopia, which was filled to the brim with a variety of weapons and survival supplies, as this year's arena was revealed to be a cavernous cenote. Several tributes, including Austin and Sierra, appeared quite nervous at the need to swim or wade through the water ahead of them to reach the cornucopia, though the pair from 4 were notably delighted at their advantage over the others. The water was only a few feet deep, but many tributes had never received any formal swimming lessons before, and were thus standing around, wide-eyed with fright. As the countdown commenced, nearly everyone looked around for opportunities to flee the area. Built into the rocky walls of the cenote were hollow pathways running in a maze-like network throughout the caverns. As the countdown reached its end and tributes sprang forth from their podiums, the cenote was filled with the sounds of frantic splashing and grunts of discomfort. Like most years, the careers headed inward to take inventory of the supplies in the cornucopia. Sardonyx and China, from 1, as well as Varus and Aurena, from 2, easily waded through the settled water and approached the cornucopia. They were quickly challenged by Connor and Rhine, from 4, who had also zipped through the water and were attempting to swipe supplies out from under their noses. Camphor and Sadira, from 7, waited for them nearby at the entrance to a tunnel, as this group seemed to have an alliance. Tauros, from 7, shoved the head of the girl from 6 underwater and held her there with such force that she drowned within a minute, as the 4s fought with the 2s over several bags of food and some spears. In the meantime, the 1s swiftly targeted and killed the boy from 11 while he fled the area, using a blowgun they had obtained at the cornucopia. During this chaos, Janvier and Valentine managed to skirt around the edge of the cornucopia shores and took a water bottle and a singular stone knife. They sprinted away from the cornucopia and into one of the hollow tunnels, narrowly avoiding a collision with Raya from 10 as they fled. Austin, Sierra, and Yorick ran away from the cornucopia and directly into one of the tunnels, choosing not to risk the bloodbath. Yorick looked back hesitantly while they ran, but as he did so, he witnessed his district partner being killed outside the tunnel entrance by the girl from 11. However, seconds later, the girl from 11 was also stabbed in turn by the boy from 8, who had managed to obtain a wooden dagger from the outside of the cornucopia. Most of the tributes dispersed at this time, with the couriers roaming the lake to guard their supplies and make a camp. The fours had managed to seize the food and spears and escaped into the tunnels with their allies, as the twos had given up fighting upon realizing they could not catch the retreating fours in the water. Pumping their arms and dashing through the maze of tunnels in the cavern, Austin, Sierra, and Yorick collapsed into safety upon finding an alcove tucked behind a large rock, Sierra heaving from the effort. Since the bloodbath had dispersed fairly quickly, the capital chose to sound all 4 cannons of the deceased. The sounds of pounding footsteps and dripping ceilings echoed throughout the cenote, although they all began to blur together after a short period of time as tributes became accustomed to the damp arena. Another cannon sounded only minutes later as Bucky from 9 was not careful enough with his footing and tripped, causing a stalactite to fall down on his head while running away. Janvier and Valentine sheltered in an offshoot of a large tunnel, pressing themselves against the walls in the dim light to avoid being spotted by passing tributes. At one point, Valentine came face to face with Raya while clinging to the wall, and the 2 girls stared at each other breathlessly for a moment with fear in their eyes before Raya turned and continued running. Shouts of confusion were heard from the tunnels nearest the cornucopia, where the 4s and 7s had turned a corner and smacked into Tauros. A scuffle ensued, resulting in Camphor brandishing a torch from the cornucopia and thrusting it at Tauros's chest. The torch flames greedily licked at Tauros's body as he cried out in agony, making a guttural noise that Rosalia described as not quite human. Even some Capitol viewers had to look away while his body was devoured in flames and his cannon sounded. The 4s and 7s proceeded away from this area and walked right past Yorick, Austin, and Sierra in the alcove. As soon as they passed by, the group breathed a collective sigh of relief and stepped out of the alcove to look around. They were directly off of the main circular tunnel that ran through the rocky walls of the cenote and observed several smaller offshoots that branched further away from the center. Yorick quietly pointed out to the group that the tunnels seemed to be at an elevation, as they had been forced to run up some rock stairs built into the wall when fleeing the cornucopia. Indeed, Austin observed that there were some areas of tunnels that were open and visible from the central lake, meaning all tributes had to be careful when navigating the tunnels to avoid being spotted from the center. As the trio looked around, they noticed flickering shadows and flashes of movement from some of these open areas, sending chills down their spines. While they sheltered for the rest of the afternoon in the alcove, all 3 became quite hungry. Sierra, in particular, had begun to behave in a manner described by Rosalia as hangry, making fun of Austin's rumbling stomach next to her. He responded irritably by asking her to find them some food if she was going to complain about this, and Yorick had to intervene before the bickering could continue. The 3 decided it would be best if Austin stood guard outside the alcove, while Yorick and Sierra remained inside, allowing them to strategize and attempt to figure out the nuances of the arena. Austin stood near the rock covering the alcove, where there was an open side of the tunnel that looked out over the central cornucopia area. He stared longingly down at the career camp in the midst of the central shore, stocked with food and weapons. Sardonyx and Varys chatted while dipping their feet in the water, as Shaina and Arena organized the group's stash of weapons and food. While it appeared that Austin could not tear his eyes away from the sight of so much food, his eyes seemed to light up as he noticed a nearby stalagmite a few feet over from his guarding position. Looking back and forth between the stalagmite and the career camp several yards away, Rosalia commented that she could see the light bulb going off in his head. Austin hurried back to the alcove and asked for help from Yorick and Sierra to carry out his plan. Sierra refused to help with what she perceived as a silly idea, but Yorick agreed to help Austin dislodge the stalagmite from the tunnel floor, causing the other boy to smile shyly in response. The 2 boys worked together and managed to push over the surprisingly light stalagmite, carefully catching it before it hit the ground and made any noise. They took turns quietly hitting it against the rock outside their alcove, whittling it down to a manageable size for 2 people to hold. Unfortunately for the pair, just as they finished doing this, they heard footsteps in one of the nearby offshoots and hastily retreated into their alcove with the stalagmite. The pair from 8 sprinted past, murmuring in low tones about the locations of other tributes. As soon as they ran past, Austin and Yorick leaped back out of the alcove and huddled near the open tunnel side, observing the careers casually enjoying a picnic lunch on the rocky shore. A silver parachute floated down from the open sky above the cornucopia, directed at Orina, and she happily accepted it. Austin and Yorick watched as Orina opened the package to find a bottle of clear liquid. Austin asked Yorick if he knew what it was, but neither boy could determine the identity of the liquid. It was only a few minutes later, when Shaina filled her empty canteen with lake water and dropped several drops of the liquid in, that they realized it was water-purifying iodine. The two boys exchanged a glance, evidently realizing the lake water was unsafe to drink without purification, and therefore downing their hopes of finding anything to drink for the time being. Still, they seemed eager to carry out Austin's idea and peered curiously back at the careers. Yorick pointed out to Austin that if they threw the stalagmite up at the ceiling near the career camp, perhaps it could create a small cave-in and distract the careers for long enough that they could run in and steal some supplies. Rosalia raised her eyebrows from the commentary room, skeptically wondering aloud if this could actually work, and taking a large slurp of her coffee. The two boys staggered around and hoisted the stalagmite on their shoulders, struggling a little from the weight, and skirted as closely as possible to the edge of the tunnel ledge, as Yorick murmured instructions to Austin about the precise trajectory with which they would get the maximum impact from the stalagmite. Austin stared admiringly at Yorick as he watched him mentally perform these calculations, though he hastily turned away and blushed when Yorick turned back to ask if he was ready to go. Heaving the stalagmite back and forth 3 times, counting under their breath, the boys hurled the stalagmite out into the air. It sailed forward and up, propelled by their force, and clonked into the ceiling before sailing down into the water. They held their breath in anticipation, worried that they had not succeeded in their plan. For a second, there was total silence as the career swiveled around to search for the source of the noise. Just as Sardonyx noticed the stalagmite and began to move towards it, there was a massive crash as a shower of stalactites rained down upon them from above, sending the career camp into chaos. Sardonyx, being the closest to the source, was hit on the head by a stalactite before passing out on the shore. Varus stumbled backwards, covering his face to avoid being hit directly, and landed painfully on his right shoulder with a sickening crack. Rosalia proceeded to joke that perhaps he should have asked for body armor from sponsors instead of the iodine. Viewers heard Austin faintly call out a triumphant "Timber!" as he watched the careers scramble after being thrown backward. Shaina and Orina had been the furthest from the stalactite storm, but had been completely drenched in water and fled screaming back into the lake near the entrance to one of the tunnels. In fact, unlike their district partners, they were unharmed but were still just as distressed. This was seen to be because the girls' hair had been ruined, and they wailed at the sight of each other's newly soaked and bedraggled locks before trying to comb each other's hair with their fingers. During the confusion, and as many tributes hurried to watch from their respective areas in the arena, Austin and Yorick sprinted down the rock stairs and hurriedly waded through the water. Though they looked uncomfortable to even be waist-deep, they still charged ahead and raided the career's supply of food, water, and weapons. These had all been hidden in the mouth of the cornucopia, which was faced away from the stalactite hail, and had thus kept the food dry during the incident. The boys gleefully made off with several items, no other tributes even attempting to stop them, as they were in such great awe of the caper. Shaina shouted at them as she looked up and saw them while trying to comb through Orina's hair, but even she knew that there was no chance of recovering the stolen supplies in the career's battered state. Sierra grudgingly thanked the boys for the supplies as they triumphantly returned to the camp. The trio feasted on the supplies, although Yorick reminded the others to ration everything out to avoid going hungry too soon. The group continued to celebrate the success of their plan for the rest of the night, with some capital commentators reporting that they even saw what might have been a small smile from Sierra. On the other side of the cenote, Janvier and Valentine succeeded in finding a secluded offshoot tunnel where they could make their camp. Occasionally they would hear other tributes walking past, but during these times they stayed quiet and did not talk to each other. Whenever other tributes were not anywhere in their vicinity, they would converse in low and rapid French, continuing to assess their surroundings. As she got up to go relieve herself in a corner, Valentine suddenly slipped on the wet and rocky floor, scraping her leg on a sharp rock. She cried out in pain at her gashed leg and waved over Janvier to help her, uttering a loud swear of frustration and agony. He hurriedly removed his shirt to staunch the bleeding and remove the tiny pebbles from her wound. Almost instantly, a small silver parachute floated down for the pair, to their surprise. Janvier opened it to find a medicinal salve for Valentine's leg and a small note, which read, "Moins de vêtements, plus de cadeaux." and was addressed from C. The pair began to giggle at the sight of this note, although Janvier seemed more interested in poking fun at Valentine about her loud swear when she was first injured, and remarked that he had been startled to hear her say such a thing, stating that her mother was probably embarrassed at home. However, the more pressing concern for the 15s after applying the sponsored healing salve to the wound was to find some food before they became too hungry. While they had not taken any food from the cornucopia, they soon noticed a small pink creature identified by Rosalia as an axolotl mutt near their campsite. The pair quickly followed the axolotl, scampering away from them, and were delighted to discover that it led them past an alcove in which several types of edible fungi were growing. Janvier and Valentine gleefully raided this alcove and stuffed their pockets. Over the rest of the afternoon and evening, they noticed more axolotls scurrying around the tunnels and continued to quietly shelter in place while looking out for other tributes. Janvier used the excuse of the cenote's humidity to casually lounge around shirtless, occasionally glancing up at the cavern ceiling as if hoping another gift would come flying in, while Valentine seemed to learn from his behavior and feigned having a more grave injury than was necessary in the hopes of the pair receiving another gift. As afternoon faded to evening in the arena, most tributes had settled in various different offshoots and alcoves of the main tunnel. Sierra declared her intent to take an early evening nap inside the alcove, though her snoring soon became too much for Austin and Yorick to bear. The boys decided to take a careful look around their area, arming themselves with a wooden dagger that they had found among the career's food supplies. To their surprise, no other tributes were out and about in their section of the tunnel. However, they quickly discovered a strange box implanted into the wall at the entrance to the nearest offshoot. The box was strangely rectangular, metallic, and marked with a central metal slot. It appeared to slide out, although the boys could not move it just by tugging on the lip of the slot. While the dimming natural light meant that it was difficult to see, Austin managed to feel around with his hands and correctly decipher that there were some symbols set into the metal. Neither boy could figure out what the symbols were in the dark, so they resolved to look the following morning when there would be more light. As they began to walk back to the alcove, Yorick almost tripped on something and hastily jumped back, revealing it to be another one of the small pink axolotls. Austin laughed and teased Yorick about him being scared by the creature, though they agreed it would be entertaining to use it to prank Sierra in revenge for her snoring. Just a few minutes after returning to their camp, the anthem of Panem played and the dead were shown in the sky. The portraits of the girl from 3, the girl from 6, Bucky from 9, Tauros from 10, and both tributes from 11 were shown in the sky. At their camp, Janvier remarked to Valentine in French that this was a low number of early deaths compared to the past 2 years, and that they would need to be careful to look for a possible Game Maker-triggered event shortly after. Overnight, another cannon sounded and startled many tributes awake in the arena. Rosalia revealed that this was the girl from 9, who had attempted to get a drink from water from the central lake without purifying it, and had died shortly after. Sierra, who had been snoozing contentedly until this point, was awoken by the boys giggling as they dangled the axolotl they had found in front of her face, and she blearily swatted Austin in the face due to her half-awake state. He grunted in pain and the boys pulled away, though they accidentally dropped the axolotl on Sierra in the process, and she yelped as they skittered out of the alcove. As soon as Sierra had calmed down from the axolotl panic and berated the boys a grand total of 57 times for the prank, Rosalia even set up an insult counter on the bottom left corner of her screen, the group soon began to talk in hushed tones outside the alcove, discussing that it would probably be a good time to start scoping out the area. Just as they were about to head clockwise in the tunnel, they heard heavy footsteps pounding down the hall ahead of them. Yorick and Austin quickly dived behind the rock covering their alcove, while Sierra succeeded in commandeering a torch from the wall for herself and waved it around threateningly. Believing the incoming tributes to be the careers or the 4s and 7s, she stood her ground and prepared to attack with the advantage of surprise. Instead, the pair from 8 darted around the corner, chasing a pack of skittering axolotls that had seized their food supplies and were gleefully making off with the contents. Sierra looked aghast at this confusing display, and frantically tried to step out of the way to avoid the mischievous mutts. Flailing around, she tripped on a rogue axolotl and fell forward, dropping the torch and lighting the boy from 8's hair on fire by accident as he crashed into her. He screamed out in pain and fell forward, continuing to scream as the fire consumed his entire head and sounded his cannon. Sierra winced at this display while getting back up from the ground and looked away as the hovercraft swooped in to pick up his charred remains. The girl from 8 had kept running around the carnage after the axolotls, but Sierra appeared too tired and slightly singed to bother pursuing her, gingerly massaging her head after crashing into the boy and sinking to her knees with a surprising amount of exhaustion after such a short encounter. Despite this, she gritted her teeth and picked herself back up after a moment, holding one hand to her pale and sweaty forehead and the other to her chest. Few tributes could sleep through the remainder of the night after the second cannon, believing that the couriers were on the prowl and killing off any tributes they encountered. Janvier and Valentine were too overheated and uncomfortable to rest. Valentine proposed that they initiate their plan at this time, but Janvier warned her to wait until they could be seen better, gesturing at the early morning darkness. As the sun rose on the arena and all tributes staggered to get ready for the day after the uneasy night, the arena began to feel quite enclosed and unpleasant for many, though Rosalia speculated this was because many were delirious from hunger and thirst. Austin helped Sierra reaffix the torch from her earlier encounter to the wall without getting burnt, while Valentine continued to pester Janvier about implementing their plan for the rest of the morning. As the tributes grew progressively more irritable and restless, time ticked on through the morning. Eventually, as sweltering morning turned to equally sweltering afternoon on the second day, the tributes were startled out of their tired dazes by a cannon. Cameras zoomed in on the 4s and 7s, who had engaged in an argument and a scuffle over the remaining food. From what most viewers could gather, Ryan had been upset with Camphor and Sadira for hiding their small food supply from herself and her district partner, Connor. She angrily voiced this opinion to the pair from 7, which was perhaps an unwise idea, as they had both been holding the group's spears. As Connor turned the corner to come back from relieving himself, he walked in on his district partner being speared in the chest. Camphor and Sadira turned on Connor, asking if he had any complaints, to which he hastily replied that he did not, though the 7s continued to look at him suspiciously as the body of his district partner was collected from the wet floor. Austin and Sierra had heard this cannon from a little ways down and carefully picked their way over to a rock nearby to see what was going on. Through the open windows looking out into various parts of the main tunnel, they witnessed Ryan's body being removed by a hovercraft with a spear still lodged in her chest. For the first time, instead of berating Austin for blocking her view, insulting her allies, or making a hostile comment, Sierra put an arm around him protectively and muttered that they needed to stick together as district partners to avoid the same fate. Austin thanked Sierra for guarding the group with the torch the previous night, to which she responded that it was not that big of a deal and she just wanted to see if it was a real torch. Despite this, she reminded him sternly to keep an eye on Yorick, worrying that he would attempt to betray them since he would think that because they were from the same district, they would help each other over him in case of danger. The pair returned to their camp with Yorick and settled down for the afternoon, continuing to peck away at their food. Sierra grudgingly suggested that the group play a game of one-word stories to ease their collective tension, an effective strategy which allowed them to escape from the realities of the games for the afternoon. At Janvier and Valentine's camp, the pair from 15 were faced with a slow-paced, sweltering, and uneventful afternoon. Valentine had been prodding Janvier to execute their idea all day, and finally he gave in. Asking Valentine to avert her eyes, which she carefully did while facing away and trying to stifle laughter, Janvier cast aside his clothing and flashed Capital viewers for several seconds, offering a charming smile and repeating aloud under his breath the same phrase that Charmian had written on the note with their last sponsor gift, moins de vêtements, plus de cadeaux. Almost immediately, a storm of silver parachutes plummeted in from outside the tunnels. Janvier hurried to put his clothes back on, still sticking his foot through a pant leg while running forward to collect the parachutes. Valentine was quick as well and scooped up several in her arms with pure delight. The pair eagerly opened them to find food, water, bouquets of flowers, and one particularly risque pair of underwear for Janvier. In addition, Janvier opened one package to find several handwritten notes, most containing phone numbers and one containing a message that Rosalia declined to read aloud for the sake of Capital children. The tributes from 15 enjoyed an evening of eating, drinking, and laughing at Janvier's new gifts from enamored Capital citizens. Valentine imitated the way he had cast aside his clothes by miming casting some invisible clothing items aside and tossing her hair in a flurry of giggles, though Janvier threw a cream puff at her and told her to knock it off in French. However, hardly any of the tributes could imagine the widespread outcry back in the capital about the lackluster deaths so far. Evening turned into dusk, and although it was still only the second day, Capitalites were upset that the deaths so far had been underwhelming. Head game maker Marin was placed under pressure from Capital elites and President Mace, who threatened to take over the games himself if they could not find a way to be more entertaining soon. The portraits of Ryan from 4, the boy from 8, and the girl from 9 were shown in the sky, followed shortly by a major announcement from head game maker Marin. They sounded quite rushed and breathy when making this announcement, to the point that Rosalia asked if they were experiencing low blood sugar. According to the game makers, there would be an event commencing in 5 minutes' time, and all tributes were to leave the offshoots of the main tunnel during this time, or else their trackers would be detonated. Janvier and Valentine hurriedly gathered their belongings and ran into the hallway, crouching behind a large stalagmite. The arena was once again filled with the sounds of thundering footsteps as tributes rushed en masse out of the tunnel offshoots in a panic. Luckily for the tributes, the 5 minutes passed and no one was still trapped in the offshoots. It was at this time that heavy iron doors began to lower over the entrances to the offshoots, and tributes could see that one of the metal boxes Austin and Yorick had investigated earlier was present at the entrance to each. The boxes began to glow as the tabs in them slid out, and Austin and Yorick shivered and huddled next to Sierra as Meddy realized that the markings on the boxes were in the shape of red droplets. Head game maker Marin announced that for this event, deadly steam would begin to rise from the surface of the central lake and seep towards the outer tunnels. Any tribute who did not shed 500 milliliters of blood into one of the box's metal slots before 15 minutes was up would be killed by the oppressive steam. If tributes successfully spilled at minimum this amount of blood into the slot, the iron gates that had just come down over the entrances to the offshoots would be raised up and allow the tributes and any others accompanying them to take shelter in the safety of the offshoots. The confusion and fright created by this announcement was further compounded by the late hour and the overall darkness in the arena. Valentine keenly pointed out to Janvier that she had begun to notice the steam rising off the lake and that they would need to get to an offshoot soon. Already, there were shouts of alarm coming from other sectors of the arena. The careers, still reeling after their humiliation the prior day, had come back with a vengeance and were prowling the halls to find other tributes. They stumbled upon the boy from 6, and even some Capitol viewers looked away as Varys and Aurena brutally slashed his femoral artery. The boy heaved and gasped, losing blood rapidly by the second, as Sardonyx and Shina hoisted him up and placed his leg against the slot of a nearby metal box. However, at this time, Varys and Aurena sneakily bolted into the offshoot without looking back, leaving Sardonyx and Shina burdened with the dying boy from 6's body. Shina screeched in fury as the iron door shut behind the twos before the ones could set the boy down and join them, railing at the door, but Sardonyx told her to leave it and that they could possibly use the blood from the boy from 6 to get into another offshoot if they were quick. Yet as they were about to reach the next offshoot over, the boy's cannon sounded and a hovercraft swept through from the center of the arena to collect his body. Having no choice but to surrender the body to the Capitol or face consequences themselves, Sardonyx and Shina grumpily allowed the hovercraft to take the body. A second later, in a flash, Shina turned on Sardonyx and pressed him into the wall. Rosalia squinted from the commentator booth at this moment and inquired if Shina was choosing this very poor timing to kiss her district partner. Yet when Shina pulled back a second later, viewers noticed the knife handle protruding from Sardonyx's armpit and him collapsing to the ground in agony. Rosalia gasped and cried out, "She just did that," as Shina winked at the cameras and held her district partner's shoulder and upper arm, spurting blood, up to the slot. After a few minutes, aided by a bloodied Shina wringing Sardonyx's weakly dangling arms, the gate opened and she dashed inside. She waited in the safety of the offshoots as she heard Sardonyx's cannon a minute later. Nearby, Connor and the Sevens attacked and quickly killed the girl from 8 with their spears, sounding her cannon. The Alliance easily escaped into an offshoot by using the blood spurting from the girl to open a door and casually dumped her body outside to wait out the impending steam wave. Janvier and Valentine began to panic, realizing that other tributes had succeeded already in spilling enough blood to get past the doors. Shortly after the cannon of the girl from 8 sounded, they heard panting and footsteps in the hallway, which were revealed to be those of Raya, the girl from 10. Janvier looked sternly at Valentine, inclining his head at her as if to say that because he had gotten so many sponsors for them so far, it was her turn to pull her weight. Valentine shook her head stubbornly in response, refusing to even look at Raya. Janvier sighed and drew one of their new weapons, a dagger, from his pocket. As soon as Raya darted around the corner, Janvier leaped from behind the stalagmite and tackled her to the ground, pinning her and sticking the dagger in her throat. Raya struggled for a moment against his firm grip and then went limp, her cannon sounding seconds later. Janvier dragged her body over to the metal box and waited for the blood to seep out into the slot. Valentine, who had been hiding her eyes for this entire scene, began to cry as she followed Janvier into the safety of the offshoot tunnel. She told him that she did not wish for them to act like this in the arena anymore, with him shedding clothes for sponsors and killing an innocent girl for their own purposes. Janvier replied harshly that it was what they needed to do to survive, and if he had not gotten the sponsor gifts or killed Raya, they would be dead. He went on to tell her that if there was one thing he knew how to do, it was how to act. Valentine argued back that he did not have to act in such a reckless manner, but her complaints were cut off by a loud rumbling and hissing as the steam made its way past their door. Janvier crossed his arms in response with his eyebrows raised skeptically, indicating the steam, and Valentine looked away defiantly with red-rimmed eyes. The pair did not talk for the rest of the night, even as they quietly ate a late-night meal and tried to get some rest. Just letting you know, there is a content warning ahead for self-harm. You can skip to 1 hour, 0 minutes, and 49 seconds to avoid this scene if needed. Again, thank you for understanding. I did mention this at the beginning, so if you do need to skip past this part, please feel free to do so. Thank you. The Fives and Yorick scrambled around in a panic upon hearing the announcement, with Yorick in particular becoming hysterical at the thought of having to shed blood into the metal slots that the boys had just inspected earlier in the day. Sierra gloomily offered to find another tribute to kill for the group and secure a spot, but Austin held up a finger to stop her. Instead, he suggested to the others that they each give themselves minor injuries, totaling up to 500 milliliters of blood, without actually killing anyone or putting themselves in a dangerous confrontation with other tributes. Yorick appeared impressed by this plan despite his initial reservations, as Sierra simply shrugged in response. Austin carefully asked Sierra to hand him the group's knife and thinly sliced into his upper arm, spattering blood on the alcove walls. He sprinted into the main tunnel and flung his bloody arm at the slot, siphoning off as much as he could into it. Sierra followed a moment later, slashing her calf and doing the same. Yorick was too afraid to injure himself with the knife, so Sierra swiped the knife across his upper arm for him, and the trio frantically brushed as much of the spurting blood as they could into the box. The steam ebbed closer and closer, as most other groups had already escaped. At last, moments from the curling tendrils of steam, turning the corner, the gate creakily slid up to allow the tributes inside with their supplies. The trio breathed a collective sigh of relief and collapsed to the ground, nursing their injuries with their shirt sleeves. Head game maker Marin declared to the remaining tributes that the event was over and congratulated them for making it through. Almost all of the tributes slept soundly through the rest of the night, exhausted by their ordeal. The cameras focused in on each group in turn: Connor and the Sevens, Varys and Aurina, Shaina, Janvier and Valentine, and Yorick and the Fives, as they turned in for the night. As the sun rose at the center of the arena to signal the third day, nearly all tributes were fatigued and irritable. The 15 slowly began to talk again the next morning, apologizing to each other for the harsh words the previous day. Janvier even enveloped Valentine in a gentle hug, promising her he would do whatever it took to get them both home safely. Valentine responded that only one could win, but that she hoped it would be him, as he seemed to inspire District 15 and offer them hope in ways the capital never could. Most of the morning passed without event. Head game maker Marin had pleased the capital audiences with the bloodshed the prior day, so tributes were permitted this morning to leave the offshoots and wander around. The gates retreated back into the ceiling, so several more adventurous tributes moved around the tunnel areas in search of potential kills. The careers counted themselves among this group, prowling around on the lookout for any unsuspecting outliers. Shaina encountered her former allies in the corridor near her offshoot, and the trio appeared to make up after the betrayal of the prior day, with Shaina telling the twos that she would have had to eliminate Sardonyx at some point anyway. The careers decided to roam the tunnels as a pack, and stumbled upon the Sevens soon after. Connor had left to gather the group's supplies, so the Sevens were unguardedly idling around and chatting. Varys grinned at his allies, indicating the unsuspecting Sevens with a thumb. Aurina gleefully slit her finger across her throat in an imitation of killing, and the trio crouched behind a stalagmite to strike. As if conducting a coordinated strike, they fanned out from behind the stalagmite. Aurina charged directly at Sadeera, headbutting her straight over the rocky ledge and causing her to slam down into the water below. Sadeera's cannon sounded upon impact, while Camphor grappled with the combined weight of Shaina and Varys, pinning him on the rocky and wet tunnel floor. However, his struggling was quickly ended when Aurina pulled out the career's blowgun from earlier and huffed into it, sending a dart directly into Camphor's neck. His eyes rolled back into his head, and he convulsed for a moment before crumpling as a second cannon sounded. The careers high-fived each other and congratulated each other on a job well done, celebrating the ambush. They retreated to the comfort of a nearby offshoot tunnel, where they could observe the action happening in other areas of the arena without having to move from their location. They plotted their next moves, recognizing immediately that there were now only 9 tributes left at this time. Austin, Sierra, and Yorick stayed in place for most of the day, fearing prowling tributes. This turned out to be a good idea, as the trio all appeared a bit jumpy after hearing the cannons of Camphor and Sadira. Yorick thanked Austin for his quick thinking the past night, although he ruefully added that he didn't think his body would agree. The Alliance continued to rest up and consume their supplies. That night, the portraits of Sardonyx from 1, the boy from 6, Camphor and Sadira from 7, the girl from 8, and Raya from 10 were shown to tributes. The night that followed was uneasy, as most could feel the tension in the arena that likely signaled an upcoming announcement. Instead, most of the day was mundane, as tributes huddled in their shelters and did not venture out much unless it was to relieve themselves. At approximately noon, Yorick decided to do this and exited the shelter he shared with the Fives. After several minutes without Yorick returning, Austin and Sierra began to worry that Yorick had been having some difficulties passing urine, and they agreed to search for him. To their horror, they stepped outside of their shelter to witness Connor swiping his knife across Yorick's throat, causing him to fall to the ground and his cannon to sound a few moments after. Austin cried out in shock and alarm, his face paling as he watched the boy being transported away, while Sierra glared at Connor and laboriously pulled a torch from the wall to protect them, though this clearly took a great effort on her part. Standing her ground, she growled at Austin to run while she held him off, but he refused to leave and told Sierra he had brought their knife with him to help. Connor wiped off his bloody knife on his shirt and assumed a fighting stance, but just as the 3 were about to engage, head game maker Marin's voice sounded out over the arena. To the shock of all the remaining tributes, there was going to be another arena event, commencing immediately after this announcement. Groans and cries of, "Again?" sounded out around the arena, but even these did not drown out the explanation that followed. Head game maker Marin informed the tributes that in many real historical cenotes, now reduced to sunken caves by years of war, there often remain the skeletons of human sacrifice victims. One of the most famous examples of these was known as the Crystal Maiden, a victim around the same age as the tributes themselves, whose bones had calcified after death. They continued on to explain that for the 103rd Games, the capital would be recreating the Crystal Maiden in a larger-than-life form. Before the tributes had any time to ponder the meaning of this statement, a deep rumbling was heard from the very annals of the arena's lake. Indeed, the entire arena began to shake rapidly, knocking tributes onto the ground and sending supplies crashing into walls. Connor fell backward and clung to the edge of a rock ledge, legs dangling over the lake below. Sierra and Austin were thrown into a wall behind them, landing with a painful thud. As the tributes all watched in horror, a massive skeleton rose up from behind the cornucopia on the shore, bones clattering and rattling. Across the arena, Valentine let out a high-pitched scream. Head game maker Marin continued by explaining that the Crystal Maiden would pursue all of the tributes and aim to kill them, but the only way to stop it was by killing or sacrificing another tribute to give it vengeance for its past fate. The Crystal Maiden would depart when there were only 2 tributes left to allow for a final showdown. Head game maker Marin wished the tributes good luck and signed off, leaving 8 terrified tributes and 1 vengeful giant skeleton to their own devices. The Crystal Maiden surveyed the area for a moment, almost as if feeling around for human presence. Its great gaping eye holes landed on the Twos and Shina first, as they were the first ones to pop back up after being thrown into a stalagmite during the announcement. Jawbone clacking, it stretched one bony hand out to the careers and snatched them up in its grasp, as they wriggled and writhed. As it appeared that the Crystal Maiden was about to crush the trio, it noticed Connor shimmying along a ledge and seized him along with the careers. Janvier and Valentine tried to run, but they too were snatched up by its free hand, as were Austin and Sierra. Once the skeleton had all tributes in its hands, it dropped them in the lake and watched them scatter. Valentine screamed as she was nearly trampled by the scrambling Fives and pumped her arms frantically to splash away from the center, yet Orina got there first. Slamming Valentine into the wall, she bashed her head into the rock wall dozens of times as Valentine cried and continued to scream for Janvier to help. Janvier arrived just in time to watch Orina bash his district partner's head against the wall one last time, sounding her cannon. He broke down for a second into muffled sobs, running his hands through his hair in agony, but jumped back up to his feet and continued running after realizing Orina had seen him. Aurina brought Valentine's body to the Crystal Maiden and laid it down in front of the skeleton. It looked at her unblinkingly for a moment before creakily nodding, allowing her to walk away. However, she had barely gone a few feet when a snarling Shina pounced from behind a rock in the lake. Shouting that she had never actually been over the betrayal during the deadly steam event, Shina buried an axe in Aurina's chest and laughed wildly with satisfaction as the girl's cannon sounded shortly after. She laid Aurina next to the body of Valentine and gave a sarcastic thumbs up to the Crystal Maiden as it accepted the offering. Moments later, those remaining started to panic as the Crystal Maiden had begun to single out individual tributes to target. Connor quickly became the next victim, as he had been rooted in place with fear ever since the Crystal Maiden had deposited all of the tributes in the center of the arena. The Crystal Maiden swiped its claw-like hand out and speared Connor through the chest with a single bony finger, flicking his body at the far wall and sounding his cannon. It was about to move on to pursue the fleeing Austin and Sierra, but was distracted by the fight occurring on the cornucopia shore between Shina and Varys. Varys was enraged by Shina sacrificing his district partner to a big bag of bones, in his words, and had some choice words for her as they fought each other. Janvier used this time to crouch in the water near where his district partner had been killed, watching the actions of the other tributes closely. While Shina and Varys were locked in combat, he noticed Austin and Sierra smartly skirting up into the tunnels to observe the action from a safe distance. The Crystal Maiden was trying to decide if it will be best to wait for either Shina or Varys to win, or if it will be better to go after one of the other three tributes. During this time, the pair from 5 skittered into the main tunnel and sprinted down towards their former campsite, Sierra breathlessly taking 2 torches along the way and handing one to Austin. When he began to protest that he was not strong enough to handle it, she turned to him seriously. She reminded him that even though she had detested everything about the games up until this point, he was one of the few things she could appreciate, and he had become somewhat of a younger brother to her in the arena. Austin looked down in embarrassment, but Sierra told him with surprising gentleness that if it had not been for his quick thinking, they would have not had food or even survived past the second day. She then let go of the torch she had offered him, smiling sadly, and to his shock, he was able to wield it without faltering. Austin gasped in astonishment at this, but smiled sheepishly and squared his shoulders. Sierra patted Austin on the back, took him by the hand, and they hurried back down to the lake. At the lake shore, Varys had finally managed to overpower Shina and smugly thrust his spear through her abdomen, causing her to stagger back and fall to the ground. Though she flailed and tried to get back up, he withdrew a smaller dagger from his pocket and continued stabbing her in the chest, sounding her cannon in minutes. The Crystal Maiden seemed pleased with Varys' sacrifice of Shina and turned away to look for other tributes. Janvier realized he needed to act fast in order to draw his attention away from him, so he grabbed the closest thing he could find, which turned out to be a stray axolotl. He hurled the wriggling axolotl at Varys, who was triumphantly wading away from the cornucopia. The axolotl hit him squarely in the face, causing him to stumble and attempt to pull it off his face while it clung to him. In this moment, Janvier charged forward and wrestled Varys' spear and dagger out of his hands before using the same dagger to pin him down. The career boy fell backward into the water, furiously thrashing about like a captured shark, but Janvier was too quick and dodged his punches, slamming the dagger down into his eye and causing him to howl in pain. Using this distraction as an advantage, he plunged the spear into Varys' neck with relish. His cannon sounded a few moments later, and Janvier staggered slightly as he brought Varys' body to the Crystal Maiden, who had been rather interested in this fight. It now focused in on Austin and Sierra, as Janvier had made a sacrifice and was immune. The Crystal Maiden seized the 5s and dropped them down in the water in front of it, bellowing loudly as if to encourage a fight. Austin shakily held his torch up, preparing to fight Sierra, but she shook her head and tossed her torch to him. He almost buckled under this weight, but surprisingly regained his footing a moment later and was able to wield both at the same time, though he appeared embarrassed that Sierra had given her torch to him when he had been prepared to fight her. As the Crystal Maiden closed in on them, Sierra turned and calmly declared that she would be sacrificing herself to it. Austin, staggering forward, cried out, "No!" but was almost drowned out completely in the resulting roar of acknowledgement from the Crystal Maiden. Sierra turned to him and gently remarked that it had been an honor to be his district partner, but that only one could win, and that she wanted to stick it to them with a dark grin. To the confusion of many Capitol viewers, she placed a hand on her chest and smiled sadly at her district partner, revealing to the shock of all viewers at the 2 remaining tributes that she had not even expected to make it this far in the games due to being diagnosed as a baby with an incurable heart disease that her family did not have the money to treat. She continued by admitting that her family had not even expected her to live past infancy, but that she had surely made them proud by surviving this far, and ruefully smiled at the sudden understanding that had crossed Austin's face upon recalling her fatigue at the training center and how she had clutched her chest in pain after fending off other tributes. Sierra continued talking, more tears progressively spilling down her cheeks as she admitted that the reason why she had suggested that their alliance play a game of one-word stories to relieve stress earlier was because she had often played this in the past with her parents to distract her when she had bad chest pains. Furthermore, she added that her disease would likely have killed her at some point anyway, and wanted someone else to have a chance at living a full and healthy life rather than the low quality of life she would have had, regardless of if she won. She turned back to the Crystal Maiden, a few more tears slipping down her cheeks, as Austin and Janvier watched gravely from the sides. Squaring her shoulders and calling out, "Come and get it, bonehead," while raising her arms, Sierra allowed it to seize her in its tight grasp and dash her against the rock wall, sounding her cannon instantly as her body slid down and crumpled into the lake. Janvier, who had been keenly watching this exchange from the side and clearly hoping the fives would kill each other, awkwardly stepped forward as Austin retreated to the cornucopia shore to regroup. The Crystal Maiden wordlessly sank back into the depths of the arena, with only a quiet burble to mark its departure. Janvier dipped his new spear into the water to clean it off, eyeing Austin carefully. The two boys slowly faced each other, one on land and the other in the water. For the first time since the start of the games, the arena was deadly quiet. No more game maker intervention, no more events, just the final two tributes in a silent cavern. Janvier broke the somber silence as he laughed at Austin's pale face and dark eye circles, asking in accented English if he needed some advice on a better morning beauty routine. Austin shook his head tiredly in response, not wishing to respond to his opponent's bantering, though he seemed to almost be unable to draw his eyes away from Janvier's chiseled face and bright eyes. Janvier sauntered forward through the water, examining Austin closely, and asked him if he knew why his district partner had given herself up to the Crystal Maiden. When he shook his head again, he smiled darkly and added that it was because she was brave, and he hoped Austin was too. Without warning, Janvier hurled his spear at Austin's chest. Austin yelped and bent over backwards, still juggling the pair of torches as the spear passed inches above his face. He spun around wildly, trying to aim at Janvier with the torches, but missed and almost dropped one in the water. Austin staggered backward as Janvier retrieved the spear from the ground, casually commenting that he wished he had spent more time at the spear station, rather than the archery station during training. The boys circled each other on the shore, both dripping water and Austin trying to hold two torches at an elevation to stop them from going out. Janvier coughed and brushed off the tip of the spear before grinning again at Austin and telling him that he had not expected to make it this far. Austin replied that he had not either, and if it had not been for Sierra's sacrifice, he would likely have become just like the Crystal Maiden. The boys continued to circle each other, eyeing the other with a critical gaze. Janvier's fingers tensed on the spear, and Austin's eyes flicked down as the other boy charged. Once again, he barely dodged out of the way as the boy from 15 skidded to a halt opposite him, still grinning. Austin asked Janvier quietly if he thought that the games were a joke, to which Janvier snapped back sharply that he knew they were not, but that he did not want the capital to win by letting a boy from a continental district have victory over him. Austin frowned at this and reminded Janvier that he too was a part of Panem. The other boy scowled and jabbed the spear threateningly at Austin, replying that he was not a citizen of Panem and would never be, proceeding to rant about this extensively. As he did this, Austin hurriedly ducked down beneath the monologuing tribute and whipped one of his torches across Janvier's pant leg, sending flames blooming across the base. The other boy yelped and leaped backward while holding the spear out threateningly, panting in agony as he stamped out the growing flame on his leg by tearing off his shirt and beating it, muscles gleaming with sweat in the dim cavern light. He continued to glare at Austin, but was in too much pain to move from his position, the spear slipping from his hands and into the water, as Austin tilted his head to look at Janvier with curiosity and a bit of interest. Rosalia pointed out with mild amusement that Austin was nearly a foot shorter than Janvier, yet was casually holding him at torch point. Janvier uttered a string of profanities in French that were not translated on Capital TV for once, as they were quite improper both in French and English. Austin told Janvier firmly, still gazing at him, that whether he liked it or not, they were all a part of the games now and he needed to understand this. Many viewers found it rather comical that a 14-year-old, shorter than the torches he was carrying, was lecturing an 18-year-old about maturity. However, they then recalled that said 14-year-old was also leveling a torch at said 18-year-old's chest. Janvier breathed in and exhaled in a low hiss, calmly rolling his eyes and motioning with a hand for Austin to approach and listen to what he had to say, as he was unarmed. Austin hesitantly inched forward, holding out one torch in front of him and the other behind him. In a flash, Janvier lashed forward and grabbed one of the boy's torches, holding it inches from his forehead. Austin sighed at this display as if recognizing he should have expected it, and as Janvier was fixated on taunting him for his lack of foresight, he performed the one move no viewer or tribute could ever have expected. This came in the form of a classic and swift kick to Janvier's groin. The howl that ensued was far more piercing than even the Crystal Maiden's moans and groans from earlier in the day. Austin staggered back as Janvier pushed himself up to a standing position and charged forward, the boys clashing torches and sending sparks flying into the water. They gritted their teeth in pain and frustration as the torches pressed at each other, trying to avoid the greedy flames licking at the air. To Janvier's surprise, a moment later, Austin pulled away from the fight and began running in circles around the cornucopia, instead of continuing to fight, as Rosalia commented that years of running around nuclear reactors in District 5 must have helped him with this task. Janvier angrily pursued him once more, staggering after him as his torch flame wavered unsteadily. As he chased Austin around and around the cornucopia, appearing to be going in circles, Janvier began to feel quite dizzy and soon slowed to a stop, clutching his free hand to his head. Without realizing it, his grip on the torch slackened, and the very tips of its flaming end touched the lake. The torch was immediately extinguished in a plume of smoke. Janvier shook his head to get out of his reverie and realized this to his absolute horror as he dizzily dashed his head against the rocky structure behind him and fell into a crumpled sitting position. Moments later, rooted to the shore in a confused daze, he barely registered with a fuzzy gaze that Austin was charging at him with a determined expression, holding the single remaining lit torch. He barely registered the torch slashing flames at his body, engulfing him in fire, and he barely registered the small, mousy boy sheepishly apologizing and thanking him for being a worthy, rather attractive opponent as the world closed into darkness. A hovercraft descended from the central opening to collect Janvier's body, while head game maker Marin announced that the victor of the 103rd Games was now Austin Clark of District 5. As he dropped his torch and was airlifted to safety, Austin surveyed the arena with a strangely detached yet amazed expression, almost as if he did not believe he had truly won. However, as the tracker was removed from his arm and he was checked for injuries by a team of medical personnel, his face slowly broke into a smile of relief. For his victor's interview, Austin wore a crisp new suit, which faded from dark gray at the pant legs to a pale gray at the shoulders, to symbolize the smoke emitted from District 5's nuclear power facilities. Rosalia arrived in a dress covered in layers of presumably fake bones, complete with bone earrings and a bone necklace, though Austin did not seem keen on attempting to figure out if these bones were real during the interview. Rosalia then congratulated Austin on his win and invited him to tell viewers about some of the more memorable moments from the games. He shyly admitted that while he did not think he had done much or caused the most action in the games, he did enjoy seeing the looks on the careers' faces when him and Yorick took down their entire camp with a single stalagmite. Capital audiences chuckled good-naturedly as the footage of this moment was shown on the screen behind them. She asked how Sierra's death had affected Austin, although she appeared to worriedly glance to the side at several Capitol officials in the audience while asking this question. He admitted that he did not like Sierra much initially and found her to be rude at first, but that she had grown on him over time. The audience let out a chorus of awes at this comment, and Rosalia commented that it was very brave how Sierra had sacrificed herself to the Crystal Maiden. Austin nodded solemnly, appearing overcome with emotion. Rosalia graciously moved on and announced that his victor's nickname was to be the Torturer, after the chaotic final fight which saw him torching his final opponent. He laughed slightly upon hearing this, and admitted that he had not expected this nickname as he had been in a zone for the entire finale, and had hardly realized what was happening until the hovercraft was collecting him to announce his victory. Rosalia concluded the interview amid respectful applause and welcomed in head game maker Marin next for their annual interview. They arrived in a smart cream suit with a stunning boutonniere blooming with various flowers and containing a few tiny realistic creatures that could not be identified by our analysts from camera footage upon first watching the coverage of these games. Head game maker Marin, appearing rather tense after President Mace's reported dissatisfaction with the rapid-fire events in these games, put on a brave face and was the first to say that sponsoring had not gone quite as they expected that year, with the vast majority of sponsor gifts flooding in for a single tribute after he gave the Capitol a sight to behold. Rosalia laughed in response and admitted that she would certainly have sponsored such a sight as well if she had not been commentating at the time. As usual, she prodded head game maker Marin for hints about the following year, but they simply smiled cryptically and said it would be a tempting arena with many delights. The assembled crowd called out to head game maker Marin for more details, but they winked and put a finger to their lips before leaping up, saluting, and scooting off stage. Rosalia shrugged good-naturedly at the crowd amid their laughter. After returning to District 5, Austin continued to mentor tributes for many years. He settled down several years after his victory and married Sparrow Laurier, a distant male relation of second incarnation victor Lynette Laurier. While never the loudest presence in a room, he was known to many as a caring friend and would often make conversation with other victors at capital events, though it was widely reported there existed a one-sided rivalry between another future victor and himself. Together with Sparrow, he adopted a daughter, Ignalina, who would be eventually raped into a future games. They also adopted a cat named Sir Dumplinghead, a descendant of Lynette Laurier's cat, Sir Pumpkin Wiggles. Austin was known to sharply reprimand critics of his former competition, Janvier and Sierra, often stating in interviews that they had both arrived in the arena wanting to make a point and had certainly done so in the games. Despite being orphaned himself, we know that he lived a fulfilling life by raising a family of his own and cultivating friendly relations with numerous other victors. He was known as a devoted husband, father, mentor, and friend to all. It is reported in many of our documents that after the death of Janvier Picard in the finale, protests erupt across District 15, accusing the capital of rigging the games in favor of a continental tribute over a beloved public figure in District 15. President Mace swiftly denied these allegations and sent the 10 terrors back to France to threaten those involved, thereby quelling the protests for the time being. However, there remained lingering resentment and distrust of the reaping process in this district for the next several years, with many citizens privately equating being reaped in the district to une sentence de mort, a death sentence. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Panem Reborn, File 103. I really hope that you will continue to enjoy the series as we go along. And don't forget to join the Panem Reborn Discord. I promise Austin is not holding a stalagmite to my head. So thank you again, guys, and I really hope you have a great day, afternoon, evening, or night. And remember, Panem today, Panem tomorrow, Panem forever.